Well, good morning, everyone. This room seems like it's full. I think my glasses are clean. Let's try that again and see if I might hear everyone's voice. Good morning, everyone. Wonderful. Welcome, welcome. My name is Tulane Montgomery, and such a pleasure to be here with you today. I am managing partner of the National Venture Philanthropy New Profit, the first philanthropy to bring the power of venture support for leadership and entrepreneurs into the philanthropic space. And I'm here with this incredible panel because we are a motley crew of folks who have come together to really unlock.
Who's the motley one?
We got the rebel over here, Mr. Plepler.
Yeah, we're gonna have a good morning.
He's
right?
a rock star.
He is, he truly is. Right? We have more than one rock star on this stage. So we came together to launch an initiative called Unlock Futures, which we're going to spend some time talking about. But I do want to just orient us a little bit into why we are at a conference about talent talking about criminal justice, right? And part of it for us is about literally the name Unlocked Futures is intentional. It's about that we as a nation have an abundance of talent, genius, and innovation that we have systematically blocked from not only entering but thriving in our workforce. And that is a reality and norm that we can no longer afford fiscally, ethically, from a human perspective, from a moral perspective. There's a real urgent mandate for us to get smarter about expanding our talent pipelines. And so that's what we're here to talk about this morning. Is that all right with you all? Works for you? All right, sounds good. So Unlock Futures is what brought us together. It's an innovative initiative that is designed to identify and support entrepreneurs who have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. And we provide these incredible leaders with unrestricted growth capital and capacity building support to help them build and grow their ventures. But in addition to that, we also partnered with Free America in order to tell the stories of these leaders and the stories of their innovation and genius, because we know it's not enough to help build and grow their institutions. We also need to change the public narrative, the story we tell ourselves about where leadership and talent and genius reside. So with that, let's talk a little bit, right, about this. And I feel like my panel needs no introduction, so I kind of went ahead. So let me just go ahead and do it the right way and introduce, even though I do think really this panel does need no introduction. So we have to my immediate left, singer, songwriter, producer, philanthropist, creator, John Legend, and founder of Free America. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
To the left of John, we have my sister from another mister, incredible entrepreneur, activist, founder of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, Topeka K. Sam. Then we have the rock star and motley of the motley crew, Andrew Plepler, who is the head of Environmental, Social, and Governance at Bank of America, key partner in Unlock Futures.
Thank you. Thank you.
So John, let's start with you. It's not intuitive necessarily when you're talking about talent and workforce to talk about criminal justice. Why are the two connected in your mind, and what brought you to do this work with Unlocked Futures?
Well, first of all, I want to kind of step back and say what brought me to thinking about criminal justice reform. Part of it was going to our schools and meeting our young people. I've spoken with a lot of teachers, a lot of folks who run schools, and talked about some of the challenges that they face in some of our most challenged communities. And a lot of times, you would find that so many of the young people in our schools were dealing with having family members who were incarcerated at that time, people who had one of their parents who wasn't available to them to give them love and financial support and all the things that they would need from a parent because they were in prison. I've had family members of my own who were locked up and unavailable to our family in the way that they needed to be. And when we put so many of our community members in prisons and jails, we're excluding them from so much. And part of what we're excluding them from is their family and their community. And what we're seeing in some of these areas is the after effects of that kind of destruction and disintegration of community. And what I wanted to do was focus on freeing this human potential up and saying, how do we make the most of all of our community members? How do we integrate them back into the community? Say, you're part of us. How do we integrate them back into the economy? How do we make it possible for them to live and work and grow and love and be community and family members? And one of the most important ways is that when folks come back from prison, when they return to their communities, we make it hospitable for them to reintegrate and join the community. And what that means is they should be able to get housing. They should be able to get a job. If they have an idea and they want to start an organization, there should be folks around that want to help them, invest in them, mentor them. And what we did with Unlock Futures was to try to create an organization that nourished that kind of spirit, where we said, if you have a great idea and you're having challenges finding folks that will invest in you, we want to invest in you. We want to make it clear to this country that we can't forget about folks once they've made a mistake and spent time in the prison system. We can't throw them away. We can't exclude them. They don't go away when we throw them away. They're still here. And for us to make the most of our human potential in our country, the best thing we can do is invest in these folks, invest in their development, invest in their growth, invest in their ideas, and invest in the idea that we're all in this together.
Love it. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, John. There's so much in what you just said. I want to pull out a couple of pieces that connect to a question I have, Topeka, for you. You know, there's a lot of really important work going on right now around changing and reforming the criminal justice system. Some call it the American legal system as an alternative name. Mm-hmm. And what's sometimes missing from that work is the articulation of a powerful vision of what the new reality should be, right? And you talked about that, a world in which when people are incarcerated and serve their time, that they are able to come back to a community, to a life, to a livelihood that allows them to thrive. But Topeka, you know, you and I have talked about, you know, what I sometimes call hidden incarceration. The fact that, you know, the story is that in the United States, if you are charged with a crime, if you are, you know, required to serve a sentence, that you serve your time, you pay your, quote, debt to society, and then you come home. But that's not the reality. Mm-hmm. There are a series of negative impacts that people face when they come home from incarceration that mean in many ways the sentence continues long after. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about what do people face when they leave prison and go back home?
That's right. So thank you for having me join again, and thank you, John, Unlock Futures, and Bank of America. So I would say when we look at the barriers to reentry, we call them collateral consequences. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, you think that once a person goes to prison, they do their time, that should be the end of the sentence, and then they should be able to start their life anew. But that's not the case. You have parole and probation, which is also another level of surveillance. And for the 2.2 million people that are presently incarcerated, there's 4.7 million people that are incarcerated in their communities. And those people who are incarcerated in their communities cannot get jobs. They cannot get housing. And if you can't get a job and you can't have housing, how are you going to eat? How are you going to get your children back if you lost your children, which women being primary caretakers of young children, typically 80% or 85% and growing of women and going into prison are mothers. That now the children are getting lost. And to John's point, then the mothers can't be there to provide the love and the resources to the children. And unfortunately, that then can have a trickle effect on the communities and now over-policing of our children. And it's all of these different things. And so, you know, what we're doing, the entrepreneurs in the first cohort and now the second cohort, where's my sisters and brothers? I know you're here. I want to give you a shout out. Let me see you. Raise your hands.
There you go.
All right. Yeah. There they go. this is part of the future, right? Part of investing into formerly incarcerated leadership like myself and them and many others is a way that we're keeping communities safer, that we're reducing recidivism, that we're allowing people really to have the things that they need to transform their lives. And it does not start with just entry-level positions all the time, right? Like, there are transferable skills that people have. Before I went to prison, I was in college. I was division chairperson for the union for Amtrak for New York and DC. I own 2 businesses. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So I knew business. And for me to come home and be told that I need to take a 16-week Microsoft course in order to maybe get a job when I could have taught that course was really disrespectful, in my opinion. But also, when I was incarcerated, the fact that for women, they wanted to give us, for adult continuing education courses, knitting and crocheting, as if those courses would be transferable and help me to have a great life for myself afterwards, unless I wanted to start a knit shop, and that was not something I wanted to do. So in thinking about restoration of the Pell Grant, thinking about making sure people have access to these opportunities while they're incarcerated, so that prevents them from having issues when they come home, is what part of, I think, what we're doing here with Unlock Futures.
Yeah, thank you so much, Topeka. So in both John and Topeka's comments, you know, we heard about so many aspects of life. We heard about housing, we heard about education, we heard about health care. There's so many systems coming together. And even on this panel, you know, we have a real cross-sector network represented here. You know, when we had the idea to launch Unlocked Futures, and we were in conversations with Free America and John's team, we said, you know, who can help us get behind this work, right? Who will really invest capital, resource, and endorsement of what was to some a crazy idea? And I want to acknowledge Bank of America for stepping up. And Andrew, thank you for your leadership and just enrolling the Bank of America and your capital and your resources and your talent to support Unlock Futures. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And I am.
Now, do you want me to leave?
No, that's it. We're done now. That's it. Well done. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
We'll talk later.
And goodbye.
We'll talk later.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm a hip hop baby, so I'm a fan of the shout out. And so I have to give a shout out to my partners in purpose on this who are sitting right here. So Carrie Sullivan, head of Bank of America Charitable Foundation, thank you for your leadership and your work. And Danielle Campos, thank you also, member of the Bank of America Charitable Foundation team. Thank you for all of your leadership. Thank you. Because it really does take a village, a team, a squad to make this work happen, because we're working against so many systems and norms that really need to change. So with all that said, Andrew, you know, John and Topeka talked about health care, education, housing. What is the role of a for-profit business in this issue? What do you see as the role of the bank?
Yeah, this is sort of an exciting time, actually. It's one area that I think we can really share some optimism going forward. You know, you saw the Business Roundtable letter that came out that talked about businesses' role in society and businesses' role to engage various stakeholder groups, not solely shareholders. And that's an opportunity to get invested in the critical issues of society. And there's license now and actually an expectation that businesses are going to engage in some of the most intractable problems in society. It's no longer enough to just say we're going to go out and volunteer in the community. That's vitally important, but the expectations and the bar are now higher. People actually expect, our own employees expect us, our investors expect us, our clients and customers expect us to actually engage in some of the more challenging issues in society. And this is one. We have 2.3 million people incarcerated, 600,000 are coming out annually. What are they going to do in our communities where we work and live? And I think business is now more enlightened that this is an issue that we have a stake in solving. And I think the encouraging thing is there's bipartisan support politically, one of the few issues where you see that. Business is now overcoming some of the stigma around how do we put formerly incarcerated people into the workforce, and realizing that 95% of the people are going to get out. 50% today go recidivate. That is, from any business perspective, a bad equation. And we have a role and a responsibility in trying to address that. And we've done that both philanthropically through our support of Unlocked Futures, and we're going to now support the second cohort, which we're very excited about. But we can also invest in systemic reform, address some of the systemic barriers, and then as an employer, we need to get more engaged. And I think business is now realizing, and it's a complicated issue of regulatory and legal, and there are barriers, but now there's an understanding that we ought to engage with our stakeholders, including our regulators, to address why can't we also be an employer? We can help organizations in the community who are employing the formerly incarcerated. But if we can unlock our own hiring pipeline, us and other corporations, that's when we're really gonna begin to see progress.
That's exciting. You heard it here, right? That's really exciting. Unlocking any of the barriers to just opening the doors for opportunity for people who bring talent, innovation, but don't get the chance to get in the door. It's really powerful, Andrew. So I'd love to just, for a minute, just reflect on how we got to be here together, right? John, maybe let's start with you. You talked a little bit about why you care about Unlocked Future, care about criminal justice reform and how you saw the impacts of it, starting with education in schools. But what is it that led you to say, you know what, supporting leaders like Topeka is a way to impact this issue? How did you get here?
Well, part of it was through my own family. My own family and friends from my neighborhood. Me being someone that's high profile, that's come from a pretty small town, I hear about a lot of the issues that folks are having from my hometown. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, and so many of the issues that people close to me, close to my family were having were due to the fact that society makes it so hard for people to reintegrate. And even people that I knew did something wrong and harmed my family. People who did something wrong and harmed people who were close to me, they were also part of my community. They were, in some cases, also members of my family. And what I wanted for them, after the time period where it was deemed that they were safe enough to return back to the community, I wanted for them to be able to get a job. I didn't want for them to forever be punished for doing something wrong, even though it was to somebody I love. I wanted them to come back and be able to contribute to society and not get into that same trap where they end up doing something bad again. And that's what we have to realize, that when we send people off to prison, a lot of times it's in some remote location, it's in a rural community, and they're kind of disappeared from life, disappeared from the community, but they don't disappear. They're just out of sight. And when they come back, the solution is not to completely exclude them from life. We have to figure out a way to make them feel safe and feel like they can contribute, because if the alternative for them is going to be worse for all of us. It's going to be worse for that individual, but it's also going to be bad for all of us. And so I learned that through my own family experiences and knowing people who came back and needed to be community members again. And I keep saying that, and I keep saying the word community, because I want us to think of ourselves, even people who don't live in the same neighborhood as you, even people who don't look like you, even people who've had very different experiences from you, we're all community members, and we have to live together. We ride on the same subways, we work in the same areas, some of us go to the same schools, and we have to realize that if we're excluding people and casting them out, then we all pay the price for that.
It's a really important point. We do not go away. That's come up. A couple of you said, people do not go away. And so we must have a place for people to not just be and exist, but be seen and thrive and prosper. Someone was talking to me, I wish I could attribute the quote, about the fact that, we are dependent on each other in ways that we acknowledge, and in some ways we kind of pretend aren't true, and I hear you speaking to that. Topeka, talk a little bit about Unlock Futures and your experience, right? Talk a little bit about the impact that being in Unlock Futures has had for you. You have so many ways that you're contributing to your community and beyond. What role did Unlock Futures play in that?
So for me, it was really one of the catalysts that allowed me to understand how powerful my narrative was and how that can effectuate change. So when you have people who have lived the experience, who are actually the ones leading the efforts, who are then providing hope and providing inspiration to other people who've lived that experience, it opens up opportunities in ways that we don't even see for ourselves. And so being a part of this cohort and working with other formerly incarcerated or directly impacted leaders across the country was really exciting, because some of us knew each other, some of us didn't. We saw synergies in our work, and also we wanted to make sure that we were bringing those resources back into our organizations and or businesses to begin to help to change and shift those narratives. And so, when you spoke to the number of people who are coming home, 600,000 a year. And when you think about unemployment rates, it's I think 27% of all unemployed formerly incarcerated people is 5 million, which is 5 times the rate of unemployment. And so to speak to all of that outside of just, yes, we want to invest in entrepreneurship and leadership, because some people had businesses before they went in or dream to have a business. But then there's also ways that each organization, each corporation should invest in opening up diversity and inclusion, right? Diversity and inclusion does not just speak to those based on race, religion, gender equity, gender identity. It also is about lived experience. And when you think about a person, if I go to the doctor, I go to a specialized doctor for this thing. If I want to talk about criminal justice reform, I need to go to a person that lived the experience, because they're the expert. And I think that it's important that as we open and unlock these opportunities, that we're including people who've lived the experience at every single table. And that's why I think we're seeing a shift. Even when you think about the First Step Act, Jared Kushner, who himself had a dad who was incarcerated, right? His lived experience helped him to push and lead that. You think about the Unlock Higher Education Coalition, that one of the new cohort members, Sarita, from Operation Restoration, that's policy that they've led in a coalition by directly impacted people who've either had access to college while incarcerated, and or know the importance of making sure that people have these opportunities before they get out. So I think this opportunity for me also opens up the idea to everybody in this room that if you were able to invest in new leadership and new talent, that so can they. So I think it changes and it shifts people's thinking on many different levels.
I really appreciate your comments, Topeka, because we talk a lot in the Unlock Futures family that proximity is expertise. Right? I feel like you just gave several examples of that being true. Often when we talk about proximity and diversity, we can kind of, I think, inappropriately apply a charity frame, that proximity is about people who have suffered the most. No, there is suffering, but there is genius, expertise, and knowledge that needs to be unlocked and leveraged when we identify leaders who've been directly impacted by the system to design the solutions to change the system.
Right.
So
And it's all of our issue
That's
now, right?
That's right.
1 in 3 adults or Americans have experienced incarceration one way or another, whether it was someone that they know, someone they employed, a family member, or themselves, whether it was something that they went through as a child that is a sealed thing and nobody knows about, or whether it was something that they did that was an indiscretion that maybe no one knows and you never got caught for it. So I think that, when we're really honest with ourselves about the things that we've individually been through, and then we can lend some support and grace to other people to understand that maybe there's a different upbringing, maybe there was different circumstances that cause people to go down a certain trajectory, that it's also important that each person takes the full responsibility to help open open those opportunities for people to change their lives.
Absolutely.
Can I just say one thing to that? That's
Yeah, please.
such a great point, because, and your point about proximity is expertise. This is one issue, people are so stuck in their views today. This is one issue where impressions actually change when they have proximity.
That's right.
This is one issue where when people are exposed to Topeka and hear the story and stop and say, how in the name of any sense of fairness and justice should this person not be able to work in society?
Right.
And I think whatever your political views are, when you get proximate to a story like that, and when John came and spoke to our board of directors 3 years ago, a bank board, not always the most progressive of institutions. That was when we got permission to really examine this issue. And then, the visibility that comes from that to sort of reorient people to say, this is nuts.
Yeah.
This is about people having an opportunity to work and become taxpayers, as opposed to becoming a permanent drain on our fiscal budgets in society. And I think people then can get beyond their own politics and say, this is a smart outcome around fairness and around just being a good business decision.
Absolutely. So you started to speak to my question. I wanted to make sure I gave you the opportunity to say, how did the Bank of America come to get behind Unlock Futures in such a meaningful way? You talked about that board meeting and John's time with your board. Thank you, John.
Of course.
And, I'm curious if there is any highlight, Andrew, you can share from that conversation with the board, because it sounds like there was a real significant shift in the mental models, the beliefs that the board held about the value of supporting this community. Describe that to us a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's about, being comfortable with a certain amount of risk. And I think that's, banks in particular are, at the end of the day, manage risk. And I think being smarter and better informed about an issue gets people comfortable that this is manageable risk.
Yeah.
And being out front in society on an important societal issue affecting our communities is what our employees want us to do. And as I said, increasingly, it's what our investors want us to do. And I think a better understanding of what the end goal is, which is to get people employed and stable in their communities.
Absolutely.
And I think that just became, that's a reasonable risk, despite the fact that things can go wrong. And this is not necessarily a higher risk population, truthfully, than many other populations in our communities.
I might need you to repeat that, Andrew. Would you say that one more time? Say that one more time.
This is not necessarily a higher risk population than other populations we deal with in our communities.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Thank you.
Don't tweet that. That was off script.
I know. Yeah, you're gonna get it later, Andrew. But thank
When
you.
you tweet it, hashtag Motley Crue.
Yes. Okay, it's a party. So, John, what would you say when you think about Unlocked Futures? What are some of the successes, lessons that would be relevant for this audience that is concerned about advancing talent pipelines in this country?
Well, one of the lessons and one of the powerful things we've seen from it is just the power of convening people together. And Topeka is part of our first cohort, and we've just brought in a new cohort. And one of the biggest benefits that they've had from being in the program is not just the cash infusion that they've gotten for their organization, but they've gotten to spend time with each other. And them spending time with each other and learning lessons together, learning from each other, learning from the challenges that each of them have faced in starting their organizations and leading their organizations and getting tips from one another has been such a powerful thing. And we've all learned from it too, from watching them interact, understanding what we can do to have the most impact on their organizations, learning what's of value to them that we can provide through our 3 organizations coming together. And it's been a beautiful experience just seeing truly, to quote the name of our organization, to see so much being unlocked and freed up for so many people to really flourish and maximize their potential.
That's wonderful. And Topeka, you touched on this a bit, but I'd love for you to just say a little bit more about, some of the unique talents and competencies that this community of leaders bring to the workforce, to help this group here in the room understand this is not about charity, this is about smart talent strategies. What are some of the gifts?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the levels of education and experience that people have, period. And so those who go in prison, it's the same, right? Like, you go in one way, you come out another. So, I mean, I was incarcerated with people from doctors, lawyers, judges, senators, who have master's and doctorate degrees, to people who may have never had a job and worked and just needed an opportunity to understand what they could do based on what their loves and their purpose, what they felt their purpose was. I feel like there's a very interesting thing with understanding that you have a chance or a second chance. For me, it was 50 chances probably. But to think about coming home and someone giving you this opportunity, to your point, there's the risk is not as you would think for someone else who might have just left college and came to get a job, right? Because first of all, there's already the stigma, you having to go to apply for the job. Even though you may not check a box in many areas, you still have to consent to a background check. Mm-hmm. So at some point, it's going to come back. The conversation is going to be had. You have to relive that experience again. And if a person is willing to say, well, thank you for sharing that, and we're willing to give you an opportunity, what do you think a person is going to do with that opportunity after just working either for free or 5 cents an hour for the last 20 years, right? So thinking about just giving, again, it's really pushing to give people that opportunity. If you see something in a person and you have them in one area of the business, think about, well, maybe their skill set may transfer into another area of the business. We started a program recently at the Lays of Hope called Pathways for Equity, where we're partnering with corporations, organizations, to give people, it's a 4-week internship where they start off and they get to move in different areas of a company to see what they like. And then once they do that, they are open to apply for any job within those different areas in the company. And we're working with Chanel, JP Morgan Chase just did the announcement, Bank of America, hopefully. Hopefully.
No
It's the
Come on, Andrew. Come through, Andrew.
But, we're open to all the opportunities with all the businesses and corporations because, the larger the pathway, the greater the opportunities for people. So I think it's just us thinking outside of the box, and also, you being that advocate inside your corporation for people who you are experiencing, right? We can't do it all, us coming into all these spaces speaking. Everyone who may have over 1 million followers can't do it because they have a level of influence and live the experience. It takes every individual and every single day to say, wait a minute, hey, I was at this conference, and this is what I heard, and this is what I learned. And I believe that we need to start implementing these practices within even HR or into hiring. So, thank you, girl.
Wonderful. So I think we have some time to open it up for a couple of questions from the audience, and I believe they will they magically appear on the monitor. So what I'll do is I'll just read the question so that the group has access to it, and then we can have a stab at it. And I think, Andrew, I might want you to start with the first response to this, just to give you a warning of that. So, there's a lot of conversation about there being a broken talent pipeline right now in the U.S. That's a lot of what you all are talking about here. Millions of unfilled jobs in this country, and employees are looking for people with the skills needed to fill the jobs. Returning citizens are a valuable talent pipeline. We've been making that case on the panel. How do we change the way that employers evaluate candidates to help ensure the success of directly impacted people in the workforce?
Well, I think part of what we're doing today is really important, because I think demystifying this topic and reframing the conversation around a pipeline and redefining who we're talking about. I mean, when you listen to Topeka talk about her experience and her hopes and dreams, you can't help but think that that is a wise investment in the future. And I think people bring to this conversation so many stereotypes and so much misinformation, and it comes from the demonizing of Get Tough on Crime.
That's right.
Decades in this country where we portrayed the criminal as a predator, and all of that had a consequence. And it formed some incredibly damaging impressions that people had of who we were talking about. And we have to redefine who we're talking about.
Yes.
And it's in venues like this. It's with John coming to our board. We're sponsoring Lynn Novick's upcoming film on PBS, College Behind Bars, which talks about the barred prison program. And what the hopes and dreams of those individuals inside that prison are. Lester Holt did a segment with John on MSNBC. That is really important. This has to be a public information campaign, in my view, because once people understand what we're talking about, I think everybody gets more comfortable with reforming the system. But we have to change some incredibly damaging and frankly, we have to come to terms with the damage that we did for decades in how we defined crime in America.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well said. When we talk about changing systems, which is what we're all committed to, we have to look at the explicit aspects of systems change, policy reform, where money goes, who we invest in, who we hire. But we can't ignore, to your point, Andrew, the mental models, the beliefs that undergird all of that. And if you don't pay attention to those mental models, you'll just recreate policies that perpetuate the same injustices. So I really appreciate your point. The point you made earlier about you can't listen to Topeka and, in any way question that this is someone who is an innovator, a leader, someone well worth investing in and supporting. And I remember, Topeka, I don't know if you may recall, in December 2017 when we were all together in New York, right? Where there was a conversation about the notion that you, because you are undeniable, are exceptional, right? This idea, are there more of you, right? Is there only one? And there's only one Topeka K. Sam, that is true. But, however, this notion, right, that, you might find one or two folks who can really execute as exceptional entrepreneurs, but it's going to be hard to come by. And I remember the conversation with Cohort 1, where you all said, yes, we are undeniable, we are excellent, but we are not exceptional, meaning that there are many of us.
That's right.
And I just want to underscore that, because that's part of the belief system. We have to believe and know that there's an abundance of exceptional innovation and talent amongst people who have been directly impacted. There was a question for you we're changing questions. Thank you. Whoever's behind the scenes, I appreciate you. So this is actually, this is a question for Topeka. So how does your work, Topeka, uplift other people who've been impacted by the legal system and create leaders for others in the community?
So part of, I think, what we do, well, we have 100% impacted-led organizations. So everyone that I hire has been impacted by incarceration in one way or another. Whether they've been impacted themselves, meaning been incarcerated, they've had a parent who was incarcerated, a sibling or a friend, or even there's a woman who was a victim of a crime, and she went to court to actually charge the gentleman, and she saw what the legal system was going to do to him, and that pushed her to go to law school. So for her, it was on the adverse. I have someone who's worked in the Legal Aid Society, someone whose parents were sheriffs. So when I hire, I ask, everyone has to write an impact statement. No matter who comes, when they submit their resume, they submit an impact statement so that I can then see how they speak about the issue and how do they come to the issue. And even though sometimes they may come in and say inmate and felon and things that I don't necessarily like, we still talk about it. I share information that I've learned in order to help them in knowing how to be sensitive around the community that they want to work with. In addition, I'm on boards of Coalition for Public Safety, Operation Restoration, the Marshall Project, and bringing other people. If there's grants that are out, then I make sure that I share them widely, letting people know there are resources that are directly for impacted-led organizations. We have a speakers bureau that we're creating, which will launch next year, called Faces of Women in Prison, where we do media training, speakers training, so that women know how to tell their story to effectively lend to policy change and advocacy, but also get paid. Because so often we relive this trauma every single day, and yet we're not being compensated for our work, because public speaking is work, right? And so, how do you begin to teach people, okay, this is what my bottom axe needs to be. This is how I need to be compensated. And you don't necessarily have to be a celebrity in order to do that, because you are speaking from your level of expertise. That's another way that I lend to bringing that relationship to people. And then whatever I learn, whether it's, how do you tap into mainstream media, if you want to produce something, what does that look like? What my experiences were going on a set, pitching for a docuseries, and how everyone behind the camera didn't look like me, but they were the ones telling me whether I was relevant to be in front of the camera. So, how do we begin? I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know, how can I find out why aren't we behind the camera? How can we create opportunities in film and production for people who have been impacted to do, because that's another level of income or a different career stream that people can go through. So I just try, as I learn every single day, I try to begin to share that information, because the more that I share, and people may not want to, be full-face glam and wear makeup all the time. I do. But I like to create those opportunities for people if they want to, and tell them that it's okay, that you don't have to present yourself a certain way because people think that because you've lived this particular experience that it defines your life. I'm 43. I was incarcerated 3 years. So that's 40 years of a life that was outside of me just being in prison. And so when I think about, how do I want to brand myself? How do I want to define myself? Yes, this experience pushed me into my purpose work, but it doesn't keep me just there. Right. So that's what I do.
So to your point about pipeline and why this is so, why this is so important to pipeline. We all talk diverse and inclusive environments are better companies, different viewpoints, different backgrounds, different perspectives at the table making decisions. These are diverse backgrounds. These are diverse experiences coming into the workplace with a perspective on life that's really important, and it's going to redefine how companies think about their commitment to society. So the pipeline isn't always just a skills conversation.
That's right.
The pipeline is a diversity of experiences and thought and perspectives conversation.
That's right.
And we ought to all be investing in that.
Absolutely. So another question from the audience is that many times the barriers to employment for justice-impacted folks is not an employer issue. It's an us, and it's capitalized and underscored. It's an us issue. It's us not wanting someone with a record in our homes and in our businesses. How are we working? And I'm going to direct this. I'll start, John, with you. How are you working to educate the public in the same way as employers? Talk a bit about that.
I think part of it is just getting to know the people in our midst. so many people, a lot of whom you don't know, have been in prison. So many people have been through the system in some way or another. And if we were to exclude all of them from public life because we're uncomfortable, we'd be excluding way more people than you think. And so what I want people to realize, we have to demystify this idea that these folks are irredeemable, that they're hardened criminals. Just as Andrew said, we have to take that mystique away and retell the story, because the true story is folks who are returning citizens are among us all the time, and we live together. Like I said, we ride on the subway together. We share the streets together all the time, and so I understand why someone might feel uncomfortable, but please realize that there are so many folks who have been in the system in one way or another, and if you allow the stereotypes you've read and seen about those folks to instill fear in your heart and exclusion, then we can't have a society that works, because there's so many people that would meet that definition.
Absolutely. Would anyone else like to add to the comment? How do we influence the broader narrative, in the public?
Well, doing this in each one of your corporations, organizations, in your homes, invite someone to speak to the issues of criminal justice reform. Talk to me or any of the 2 cohorts that are back there in the back of the room, to figure out where you can plug into the things that you are most passionate about. I mean, there again are so many ways to, take down a beast. And so you can plug in the way that suits you. But it is so very important that we look from a spiritual place and just say, hey, listen, but by the grace of God, there go I. This could have been me. It could have been my child. It could have been my mother, my sister, my brother, my aunt, whomever. And that because it wasn't, that I have a responsibility to myself and to my fellow community member to make a difference.
Wonderful.
And I always like to stress, because I think it's important that individual businesses are doing the best that they can, and individual nonprofit organizations are doing the best that they can. But that is not a substitute for us as a community coming together, as a democracy coming together, and saying, these are policy changes that will affect entire states, entire nations. Those are the times when big change happens. I think when we do a project like this, it's more of like an example, an idea that we can show to the public that says, here's the kind of broad policies that this whole nation needs to consider, or an entire state needs to consider. And so I think it always needs to be combined with democracy, with political action, with policy change. It's not enough for us to do these individual pilot programs where we work with a few organizations and help a few groups. Those are great, and they will add to society, and they're great. And I personally have invested time and energy into them. But I also invest a lot of time and energy into getting behind law changes and getting behind candidates that stand up for issues that I believe in when it comes to this issue. And so I think you have to combine the activity of business and philanthropy with the activity of democracy.
That's right. I mean, and on that note, the call to action then is for each of us in the room to consider how we can unlock future and open opportunity in our work, in our community, in our civic life, in our world. Thank you to our panelists. Please, round of applause for our incredible panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.